I'm going to begin my talk today with a thought experiment. Imagine you live your whole life in a state where you cannot get enough air. Your body can never get as much oxygen as it needs, and you suffer for it. Now imagine at the end of your life, you face anywhere from a few long minutes up to a few excruciating hours of total oxygen depletion. This will ultimately lead to your death. And if you're lucky, you'll be cut open and bled out to expedite the process. My question is, what kind of animal are you? And if you know the nature of the talk that you're seeing right now, you will know I'm of course referring to the countless farmed fish that we raise and kill for human consumption every single year. I'll return to this example later. So I have a confession for you all. I never much cared about fish before I started researching into them. And this is despite years of being involved in animal advocacy. I knew that fish mattered morally, but I didn't really feel this. Fish are hard to relate to. They don't vocalize in a way that humans can understand, and they don't make facial expressions. I can get people on board with pigs and even chickens, but fish are a lot more difficult. And then I started to look into fish and the capabilities that they do have. Fish have complex social structures and can recognize other individuals. One fish species, the cleaner wrasse, even recently passed the mirror test for self-awareness. This is a fun headline I found the other day of a diver that's been going back to see the same fish for 25 years. The fish always comes out to greet him and clearly recognizes him. So I came to realize that, sure, by human standards, not all fish species have the sort of critical thinking abilities that we consider to be intelligence. However, at the end of the day, this isn't what matters. What matters is that there is now a scientific consensus that fish are very likely sentient individuals who can suffer and feel pain. And our continued abuse of fishes showcases our very human tendency to underestimate what we don't understand. So fish are individuals who matter morally. This statement weighs heavy on you once you realize the ways in which we treat fish, which, as you can imagine, are often quite horrible. Now, if you're like me, when you think of fish for human consumption, you probably think of wild-caught fish that we catch in the open oceans. But the reality is that today, as our oceans are maxing out on how many fish we can extract from them, fish farming is painted as a sustainable solution. And for the first time in human history, most of the fish that we consume comes not from the ocean, but rather from fish farms, from aquaculture. Now wild-caught fish do face numerous welfare issues, as well as issues the industry faces with sustainability and with human rights. However, the focus of the rest of my talk and the primary focus of our charity will be on fish and aquaculture because we influence their whole lives in addition to their deaths. So fish and aquaculture face numerous welfare challenges throughout their lives. These include bad water quality, bad stocking densities, and an inability to express their natural behaviors. This last picture you see here is of a salmon farm, probably in Norway. The thing you should know about salmon is that they are a migratory species, which means that they travel thousands of miles from their spawning grounds upriver, out into the open ocean where they feed for a few years, then back to the very same spawning grounds in which they were born. Now, this fundamental drive that all salmon have is completely frustrating when they're kept locked up in pens like this. Now, this brings me back to the thought experiment at the beginning, where billions of fish live with and ultimately die because of lack of oxygen. When water quality isn't properly managed in aquaculture, a fish can face low dissolved oxygen levels. Now, fish, like all animals, need oxygen to live. And when they don't have enough, they suffer for it. At the time of their deaths, most fish can expect to be slaughtered via asphyxiation or lack of oxygen in the body. Now, this often takes place either by being simply left out in the air or put in an ice slurry. And as you can imagine, if you died via a prolonged process of suffocation, this is absolutely horrific for the individuals who experience it. You can get a sense for what this looks like here in an investigation done by Open Cages. Now, all this takes place on a mind-boggling scale. 111 billion fish are alive at any given point in aquaculture. Let's put this number into perspective. 111 billion is more fish alive right now than the number of humans that have ever existed in the history of our species. Now, I want to be clear that not all farms and practices are the same. Some are better than others, and some fish farmers do genuinely care about welfare. We've met some of them. However, at the end of the day, as you can see, When you are farming this many fish, it is very difficult to care about the welfare of any one individual. So you've just heard a lot about the different ways in which fish suffer throughout their lives in aquaculture. What are we doing about it? Well, we started a whole new charity, the theme of the day, focused exclusively on fish issues, Fish Welfare Initiative. We are a project of both charity entrepreneurship and effective altruism. And by that, we try and do as much good as we can in the world. For us, this means working to reduce fish suffering, and we are open to a variety of ways of doing that. Now, our charity has 2 stages in its plan. The first stage is research. This is the stage we are currently in and will be for another 5 months. This involves answering 4 questions. First question, which species should we focus on? Humans farm 369 species of finfish, and because they have very different welfare needs, it's critical to determine which one we are working on before we choose a welfare improvement to advocate for. 2, which welfare improvement should we advocate for? By welfare improvement, we mean something like better water quality or better slaughter methods, something analogous to the cage-free campaigns that have been run for chickens. 3, which country should we focus in? So 93% of all farm fish by tonnage originates from Asia. And just because we know the UK and the US better doesn't necessarily mean we'll want to work in these Western countries. The last question, which approach should we take? Should we work with farmers or corporations or even governments to advocate for improved conditions for fish? Now, by answering all these questions based off of what we expect to have the biggest impact, we will have our object level approach. But none of this research does any good for anyone until it's implemented. This is why the second and main stage of our organization is the implementation of a pilot program based off of our findings. Our comparative advantage as a charity is never going to be doing groundbreaking research on fish welfare science. Rather, what we expect we can do highly effectively for fish is bridging the gap between the plethora of research already out there on fish welfare science and what is standard practice today in aquaculture. We have to bridge the gap between academics and producers, activists and farmers. So this is all a little abstract. I'd like to walk you through one example of what this could look like. Taiwan farms a massive amount of fish. In fact, it's one of the top producing countries in the world for aquaculture. And furthermore, its government is actually amenable to work in foreign NGOs. So we could work in Taiwan. There, we could work on tilapia, both because tilapia is one of the most farmed species in Taiwan and because it's fairly resilient to dying, which suggests that farmers will have a great deal of incentive to optimize for welfare because the fish will probably live long enough to be slaughtered to be turned into meat later. And with tilapia, we could work with farmers to implement aerators. Now, this would improve water quality by improving oxygen levels, and thus, hopefully, reduce the suffering of fish. Of course, with work in any foreign culture, it's imperative to have people on the ground who know the culture and the language on a local level, which is why we will be hiring people who know those things better than we ever will. Now, at the end of the day, this is just an example. We see our work as an experiment. Our hypothesis is that a focused, single-issue charity can work in the animal space. This could be proven wrong, or we could fail to have impact in one way or another, in which case we'll scale down or shut down. At least here, we'd be able to tell everyone else what not to do to advocate for fish. Or we could be proven right. We could scale up and have an impact, improving the lives of millions, even billions of fish. This would tell everyone that a focused single-issue charity can work for animals. Now, you all have heard of the oft-mentioned Against Malaria Foundation. It's a charity hyper-focused on one extremely important issue, providing anti-malarial bed nets to people who need them most. It's arguably the most effective charity out there in the global poverty space. Imagine if we could run the same sort of model for animals. Now, the animal advocacy movement is at its most effective when everyone's working together and on the same page, which is why we're excited to see more and more groups focusing on fish and advocating for their interests. We hope to one day be a part of a coalition of such groups in the future, sort of like the Open Wing Alliance today, which has done amazing work for chickens. Perhaps an Open Fin Alliance could be next. Now, if you're interested in becoming a part of this movement to help fish, or would just like to see what becomes of our charity, we encourage you to reach out. You can go on our website there and sign up for a newsletter if you're interested. We're posting job ads within the next few months. Now, I'll end my talk with this. whether you're in effective altruism, animal rights, or fish farming. Thank you for listening, and thank you for helping build a movement of moral consideration that expands to all sentient life.